Security guards didn't let him argue when they pulled him away from the file room. This ordinary man who'd been cleaning the same building for years simply stepped back with his cloth and cleaning spray, accepting the dismissal without a word. But a few hours later, when the CIA director spotted him in the hallway, everything froze. The director went pale, whispered a single word: impossible. Because according to official records, this man had died 15 years ago. From which city around the world are you watching today? If this story intrigues you, please subscribe to help us share more untold stories of hidden heroism and the extraordinary people walking among us, their greatest secrets buried beneath the most ordinary appearances. Robert Harrison entered his workplace at 6 a.m., just like every morning for the past 12 years. The same routine: pass through the metal detectors, scan his security card, prepare his cleaning cart. In this massive CIA complex in Langley, he was simply a ghost. People didn't even look at him. He was 63 years old, average height with gray hair that had thinned over the years. He always wore the same navy blue coveralls and old black shoes that had seen better days. His face carried neither a smile nor a frown, completely neutral, completely invisible. In a building where some of the world's most important decisions were made, where secrets that could topple governments were discussed daily, Robert Harrison was perhaps the most overlooked person in the entire facility. Young security officer Marcus Williams had been puzzled the first time he really noticed him. "How long has this guy been working here?" he had asked his supervisors. The answer had surprised everyone. Nobody knows exactly. System records go back to 2012, but some of the older staff remember him from before that. It was strange, really. In a place where everyone's background was scrutinized to the smallest detail, where psychological profiles were mandatory and security clearances required exhaustive investigations, somehow this janitor seemed to exist in a bureaucratic blind spot. He was simply there, like part of the building's infrastructure. Robert followed the same cleaning pattern every morning with mechanical precision. First, the entrance lobby, then the cafeteria, followed by the office floors. He never spoke unless spoken to, never asked questions about anything beyond his immediate duties, simply did his work and disappeared. He was the perfect employee, so perfect that he had achieved something remarkable in the intelligence community: true invisibility. But today felt different. A new security protocol had gone into effect overnight, and now only personnel with special clearance could access floors above level 3. This meant that areas Robert had been cleaning for 12 years were suddenly off limits to him. Areas he knew better than almost anyone else in the building. The change hadn't been announced to the cleaning staff in advance. It was typical of how things worked in this place. Decisions made in closed rooms, implemented immediately, with little consideration for how they might affect the invisible people who kept the building running. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Robert wheeled his cleaning cart toward the 7th floor elevator. When the doors opened, 2 security guards were waiting for him. One was Marcus Williams, the young officer who'd been working here for just 6 months. The other was an older guard named Stevens, a 20-year veteran who'd seen every kind of security situation imaginable. "Sorry, you can't come up here," Marcus said, trying to sound authoritative but respectful. The new protocols made him nervous. He was still learning how to balance security requirements with basic human courtesy. Robert nodded silently and turned back toward the elevator, but something caught Marcus's attention. There was a metallic glint from the man's shirt pocket, something that didn't look like a standard employee ID card. In this building, even the smallest anomaly could be significant. "Sir," Marcus said, his training kicking in, "could I see your identification card?" For just a moment, so brief it was almost unnoticeable, something changed in Robert's eyes. A flash of something sharp, calculating, completely at odds with his otherwise vacant expression. Then it was gone, replaced by that familiar, harmless blankness. "Of course," Robert replied calmly, reaching into his shirt pocket. Marcus examined the card carefully. It appeared to be a standard cleaning staff identification. Robert Harrison's photo, his employee number, the familiar blue stripe that indicated his clearance level. But underneath it, Marcus could see the edge of something else. Another card, metallic, with holographic security features he'd never seen before. "What's this?" Marcus asked, pointing to the second card. Robert's expression didn't change by even a millimeter. "Old employee card. Never got around to throwing it away. Sentimental, I suppose." When Marcus reached for it to examine it more closely, Robert's movement was fluid, practiced, almost serpentine in its efficiency. He slipped both cards back into his pocket in one smooth motion and said, "If you'll excuse me, I have work to finish on the other floors." The security guards let him go, but Marcus felt something nagging at the back of his mind. There had been something about that movement, about the way Robert had retrieved those cards. It was too smooth, too professional for a janitor who'd been doing the same routine job for over a decade. The next day, Marcus decided to pay closer attention to Robert Harrison. Something about the man didn't add up, and in a building where details mattered, inconsistencies were worth investigating. Marcus began to notice things he'd previously overlooked. The way Robert moved through the building wasn't random. There was a pattern, a systematic approach that seemed almost tactical. He wasn't just wandering from room to room with his cleaning supplies. He was following routes that provided optimal coverage of the entire facility. More intriguingly, Robert seemed to have an unusual awareness of his surroundings. While cleaning, he constantly scanned the environment, his eyes tracking movement, noting who went where, who talked to whom. He positioned himself in ways that avoided security cameras' direct lines of sight, not obviously, but subtly, as if it were second nature. There was also something odd about how thoroughly he cleaned certain areas compared to others. Near important offices, around conference rooms where classified discussions took place, he seemed to linger, paying extra attention to door handles, window frames, anywhere that might— What? Marcus couldn't quite put his finger on what he thought Robert might be looking for. During his lunch break, Marcus sought out Steve Morrison, a veteran security officer who'd been at the facility for 2 decades. If anyone would remember the early days of Robert Harrison's employment, it would be Steve. "Steve, do you remember when that janitor, Robert Harrison, first started working here?" Steve paused mid-bite of his sandwich, thinking. "Robert Harrison? Yeah, I remember him, but there's something weird about that guy." "Weird how?" "When he first showed up, maybe 13, 14 years ago, he was different. Carried himself differently. Straight posture, more alert. He had this military bearing, like an ex-soldier trying to blend in but not quite managing it. Over the years, though, he kind of shrank into himself, started acting more like what you'd expect from a janitor." This information only deepened Marcus's curiosity. "Did he ever mention military service?" "Never talked about his background at all, and believe me, in this place that's unusual. Most people, even the cleaning staff, end up sharing something about their lives eventually. But Robert? He's like a void. Comes in, does his work, goes home. Never socializes, never complains, never asks for anything." That evening, Marcus decided to do something he'd never done before. He looked up Robert Harrison in the employee database. What he found was surprisingly thin. Employment started in 2012. Previous employer listed as various contract positions. No emergency contact information. Address listed as a P.O. box. For someone who'd supposedly been working at one of America's most secure facilities for over a decade, Robert Harrison's file was remarkably sparse. The third day brought Marcus to the night shift. After midnight, the building took on a different character. The daytime bustle of analysts, operatives, and administrators gave way to an almost monastic quiet, broken only by the soft hum of computers and the occasional footsteps of security personnel making their rounds. Marcus was monitoring the security feeds when he spotted movement on the 7th floor. It was a cleaning cart, but 7th floor was restricted. He grabbed his radio and headed upstairs immediately. When he reached the 7th floor, he found Robert in the hallway, but he wasn't cleaning. He was examining the walls, running his hands along seemingly random sections, as if searching for something specific. His movements were methodical, professional, nothing like the casual motions of a janitor going about his routine work. "Sir," Marcus called out, "what are you doing up here?" When Robert turned around, Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. The man's face was completely different. Gone was the vacant, harmless expression of the daytime janitor. In its place was something sharp, calculating, dangerous. For a moment, Marcus felt like he was looking at a completely different person. "Cleaning," Robert said, but his voice had changed too. It was crisper, more authoritative, with undertones that suggested he was accustomed to being obeyed without question. "This floor's restricted," Marcus said, but he could hear the uncertainty in his own voice. Robert studied him for a long moment, as if weighing options. Then he reached into his coveralls and pulled out something small and metallic. At first, Marcus couldn't make out what it was, some kind of badge or insignia with complex holographic patterns that seemed to shift in the hallway's fluorescent lighting. "Do you have clearance to be asking me that question, son?" Robert asked, and now his voice carried unmistakable authority. Marcus didn't recognize the badge, but something about it made his skin crawl. It looked official, important, and completely out of place in the hands of a janitor. More disturbing was the realization that Robert's entire demeanor had shifted. He stood straighter, moved with precise confidence, spoke with the tone of someone accustomed to command. I should call this in," Marcus stammered. "Yes," Robert said calmly, "you should." The next morning, Marcus reported the incident to his shift supervisor, Jim Collins. Collins was a former FBI agent with 30 years of experience in law enforcement and intelligence work. He'd seen enough unusual situations to know when something required immediate attention. "Describe this badge in detail," Collins said, his expression growing more serious with each word of Marcus's account. Marcus did his best to recall every detail, the metallic composition, the holographic patterns, the way it seemed to shift and change depending on the viewing angle. He also described the dramatic change in Robert's demeanor and bearing. Collins listened without interruption, then turned to his computer and began running searches. After 20 minutes of typing and cross-referencing, he picked up his phone. "This is Collins at Langley. I need to speak with Director Williams immediately." "Yes, I know what time it is. This is a code yellow situation." An hour later, CIA Director Michael Williams arrived at the facility personally, accompanied by 2 senior operatives. Collins briefed them on the situation, while Marcus provided a detailed account of his observations over the past 3 days. "Where can we find this individual?" Director Williams asked. "He's usually in the basement maintenance room during his break periods, sir." The director and his team proceeded to the basement. Williams moved with the purposeful stride of someone who'd spent his career dealing with situations that could reshape global politics. But as they approached the maintenance room, something in his expression suggested this particular situation was unlike anything in his considerable experience. They knocked on the maintenance room door. "Come in," came a voice from inside. When they opened the door, Robert Harrison was sitting there waiting for them. But this wasn't the janitor who'd been invisibly cleaning the building for 12 years. He sat with perfect posture, hands resting calmly on his knees, eyes alert and focused. There was no surprise in his expression, as if he'd been expecting this visit. The moment Director Williams saw his face, he went pale. "Impossible," Williams whispered. "Hello, Michael," Robert said, rising from his chair with fluid grace. "It's been a long time." The operatives flanking Williams exchanged confused glances, unsure how to interpret the familiarity between their director and a janitor. "You're dead," Williams said, his voice barely steady. "Kabul, 2009. I attended your funeral. I spoke at your memorial service." Robert allowed himself a slight smile. Was it a good service? "I hope there were nice flowers." "How is this possible?" Robert took a deep breath, and when he spoke, years of careful pretense fell away like a discarded costume. "Because Robert Harrison did die that day in Afghanistan, but Benjamin Clarke continued to live." Williams's eyes widened with recognition and horror. "You're cargo. You were in the Ghost Agent program. For 15 years, my last assignment concluded in Afghanistan, and I was officially terminated, killed in action, given a new identity, a new life, a chance to disappear completely." "Then what are you doing here?" Benjamin reached into his coveralls and produced that metallic badge again. In the better lighting of the maintenance room, Williams could see it clearly now. It was one of the most classified CIA operational insignia in existence, carried by fewer than a dozen people worldwide, part of a program so secret it didn't officially exist. "I'm still working, Michael. Just differently." The badge represented something that shouldn't have been possible. A deep-cover operative embedded within the CIA's own headquarters, monitoring the monitors, watching the watchers. Williams felt a chill as the implications began to sink in. Internal surveillance? For 12 years? I know who works in this building, who they talk to, what information they access, who they meet outside the office. Because nobody notices a janitor. Nobody questions why cleaning staff need access to nearly every room in the facility. Nobody thinks twice about the invisible man with the mop and bucket. Williams struggled to process what he was hearing. Who authorized this? People who don't exist in any organizational chart you've ever seen. People who understood that the greatest threats to national security sometimes come from within the very institutions designed to protect it. Before Williams could ask more questions, Benjamin's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression hardened. "We need to move now," Benjamin said, pocketing the phone. "What's happening?" "Active breach in progress. Someone is attempting to access Level 7 classified files, and I know exactly who it is." Williams and his operatives followed Benjamin as he moved through the building with sudden urgency. Gone was any pretense of being a janitor. He moved with the purposeful efficiency of someone conducting a military operation. His route through the building was direct and tactical, avoiding main corridors and security checkpoints where possible. When they reached the 7th floor, they found a man in an expensive suit working at a laptop computer outside one of the secured offices. He was using some kind of electronic device to bypass the door's lock mechanism. "Agent Parker?" Benjamin said coldly. The man spun around, and when he saw Benjamin, pure terror flashed across his face. "Who the hell are you?" Parker demanded, but his voice cracked with fear. "Don't you remember me? Kabul, 2009. You thought you'd killed me." Parker's face went completely white. No, that's impossible. You're dead. I made sure you were dead." Disappointed, Williams stepped forward, beginning to understand the full scope of what was happening. "Parker, what are you doing here?" "This man should be dead," Parker shouted, pointing at Benjamin. "He knew too much. He was going to destroy all of us." Benjamin's voice remained calm and controlled. "Parker here was selling weapons to insurgents in Afghanistan 15 years ago. When I discovered his operation, he decided I needed to be eliminated. He nearly succeeded." "You have no proof." "Don't I?" Benjamin produced a small USB drive from his pocket. 12 years of documentation. Every phone call, every email, every bank transfer. Your handlers in Moscow must be very disappointed in your recent performance." Parker reached for his weapon, but Williams's operatives were faster. Within seconds, he was restrained and disarmed. Williams turned to Benjamin, his mind reeling. "You've been watching him for 12 years?" "Him and others. Parker wasn't the only compromised agent in this facility, but he was the most dangerous because of his access level and his complete lack of conscience." "How many others?" 3 active threats at last count. Parker was the priority because he was preparing to exfiltrate a significant amount of classified intelligence. Today was meant to be his final data harvest before disappearing. Williams felt sick. "How long have you known?" "I identified Parker as a potential threat within 6 months of beginning this assignment, but building a case that would hold up under scrutiny required time and absolute proof. In intelligence work, suspicion isn't enough. You need evidence that can survive any level of investigation." "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Benjamin's expression grew grim. "Because I wasn't certain who else might be compromised. In a situation like this, you can't trust official channels. You can't know who might be feeding information to the very people you're trying to catch. The only safe approach was to remain completely invisible while gathering irrefutable evidence." He gestured toward Parker, who was now handcuffed and under guard. "Parker has been feeding classified intelligence to foreign handlers for at least 8 years. He's responsible for the compromise of at least 14 overseas operations and the deaths of at least 6 operatives whose covers were blown." Williams closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the scope of the betrayal. Jesus Christ. There's more. Parker wasn't working alone. He's part of a network that includes assets in at least 3 other government agencies. The USB drive contains evidence of the entire operation. Financial records, communication logs, operational details, everything needed to roll up the entire network. Why now? Why reveal yourself today? Because Parker was accelerating his timeline. Intelligence suggested he was planning to defect within the next 48 hours, taking whatever classified materials he could acquire in one final intelligence grab. If I'd waited any longer, he would have disappeared, and we'd have lost our only chance to expose the broader network. 6 months later, Marcus Williams sat in his new office at CIA headquarters. The events of that night had changed everything, not just for the agency, but for his own career trajectory. Benjamin's recommendation had opened doors Marcus never could have imagined. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. When he looked up, he saw a familiar figure, but transformed. Benjamin Clarke stood in the doorway wearing a tailored suit, his gray hair neatly styled, looking every inch the senior intelligence officer he'd always been beneath his janitor's disguise. "Hello, Marcus." "Benjamin. Good to see you. How are you adjusting to being visible again?" Benjamin smiled. "It's strange, actually. After 12 years of being invisible, having people acknowledge my existence takes some getting used to. But I'm managing. What's your new assignment?" "Similar work, just in different locations. It turns out there's considerable value in having operatives who can blend into any environment, become part of the background until the moment they're needed." Marcus nodded. "Are you going back undercover?" "In different ways. The beautiful thing about intelligence work is that there are always new identities to assume, new roles to play. The key is understanding that sometimes the most effective protection is invisibility." "I've been thinking about what happened," Marcus said, "about how you spent 12 years right under everyone's noses. It's remarkable. It's also necessary. The threats we face don't always come from obvious sources. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who wear the same uniform, carry the same credentials, sit in the same meetings. Catching them requires patience, dedication, and the willingness to sacrifice personal recognition for the greater good." Benjamin moved toward the door, then paused. "Marcus, I want you to remember something important." "What's that?" "Every person you encounter in this line of work, from the highest-ranking officials to the maintenance staff, everyone has a story. Some of those stories involve heroism you'll never hear about, sacrifices that will never be acknowledged, contributions that will never make it into any official record. The invisible heroes." "Exactly. And sometimes the most effective way to protect what matters is to remain invisible until the moment your visibility becomes essential." Marcus thought about this conversation often in the weeks that followed. His new role gave him access to classified files that revealed the true scope of Benjamin's 12-year operation. The information gathered during his time as a janitor had led to the dismantling of an international espionage network, the arrest of 17 foreign operatives, and the prevention of what intelligence analysts estimated could have been catastrophic intelligence losses. But what struck Marcus most was how Benjamin had chosen to remain anonymous even after his success. He could have leveraged his accomplishments into a high-profile position, could have written books or given speeches about his unique undercover work. Instead, he'd simply transitioned to a new assignment, once again fading into whatever background his new role required. One evening, Marcus was reviewing security footage from the period before Benjamin's revelation. Watching the tapes with the knowledge of who Robert Harrison really was provided a completely different perspective. He could see the subtle signs he'd missed, the way Benjamin positioned himself to observe key personnel, the systematic pattern of his movements, the barely perceptible moments when his facade would slip and reveal glimpses of his true training and awareness. But more than that, Marcus began to understand the profound loneliness of Benjamin's position. For 12 years, he'd been surrounded by people but completely isolated. He couldn't form real friendships, couldn't share his thoughts or experiences, couldn't even acknowledge his professional accomplishments. He'd sacrificed not just his identity, but his basic human need for connection and recognition. The psychological toll of such an assignment was almost unimaginable. To maintain perfect cover for over a decade required not just professional skill, but extraordinary mental fortitude. Benjamin had essentially erased himself from existence, becoming a shadow of a person in service to a mission that might never be acknowledged or understood. Marcus realized that there were probably others like Benjamin working throughout the government, in corporations, in organizations around the world. Invisible guardians whose greatest successes would never be celebrated, whose most important contributions would never be known outside the smallest circles of those who needed to know. The arrest of Parker and his network had ripple effects that extended far beyond Langley. International intelligence partnerships were strengthened as the evidence Benjamin had gathered helped Allied agencies identify and neutralize their own compromised assets. Several planned terrorist operations were prevented when the intelligence network that had been feeding information to hostile nations was disrupted. But perhaps most importantly, the incident led to a comprehensive review of internal security protocols across all major intelligence agencies. The realization that a foreign operative had been operating undetected at the highest levels of the CIA for nearly a decade forced a fundamental reassessment of how security was conceptualized and implemented. Benjamin's methodology became a case study in long-term counterintelligence operations. His approach, becoming genuinely invisible rather than simply using a cover identity, represented a new paradigm in deep cover work. Intelligence training programs began incorporating lessons learned from his 12-year operation. Marcus often wondered how many other Benjamin Clarkes were out there, hidden in plain sight, patiently watching and waiting for the moment when their concealed expertise would be needed. The thought was both comforting and unsettling. Comforting to know that such dedicated professionals were protecting national interests, unsettling to realize how little the average person understood about the hidden structures that maintained their security. The janitor who cleaned your office, the security guard who checked your ID, the maintenance worker who repaired your equipment, any of them could be someone with a story that would reshape your understanding of heroism and sacrifice. The invisibility that made them effective also made them unknowable, their true contributions hidden beneath layers of necessary deception. And so we see how a man who appeared to be nothing more than a janitor spent 12 years protecting his country from threats that could have compromised national security for generations. Benjamin Clarke's story reminds us that real heroism often works in shadows, unrecognized and unacknowledged, driven not by the desire for fame or recognition, but by a quiet commitment to something larger than oneself. The most effective guardians are often the ones we never notice, the ones who blend so seamlessly into the background that we forget they exist at all. They clean our offices, check our IDs, repair our equipment, and serve our coffee, all while maintaining vigilance against threats we never see coming. How many such people have you encountered in your own life? How many individuals have you passed by without a second thought, not knowing that they carry stories of courage, sacrifice, and dedication that would humble the most decorated public heroes? This is what we explore here at Rising Life Stories, the extraordinary narratives hidden within ordinary appearances, the remarkable individuals who choose to serve without recognition, who protect without praise, who contribute to the greater good while remaining invisible to those they protect. Think about it. The next time you interact with someone whose job seems routine, whose presence seems unremarkable, remember that appearances can be profoundly deceiving. That quiet person in the background might be someone whose hidden contributions have shaped the world in ways you'll never know. These are the stories that matter, not because they're dramatic or exciting, but because they reveal the depth of human commitment to purposes beyond personal gain. They show us that heroism isn't always visible, that the most important work is often done by people whose names will never appear in history books. From which city around the world are you watching today? Share in the comments below, and if this story has given you a new perspective on the hidden heroes around us, please subscribe to Rising Life Stories. Because somewhere out there, another guardian is watching, another protector is waiting, another invisible hero is serving, and their story deserves to be told.